very, very good to be here with you. Like Chris said, it was about 5 years ago when I was here last, and I appreciate the invitation to return and to be with you for another few days of study and edification. And we pray that we glorify God in all that we do. If you're visiting with this congregation today, I know that you're always welcome. I know this congregation would love to study with you, so if you have questions about the things that you observed today in this worship service and study time, please let any of the members here at Lindale know about that. And I know they would love to open up their Bibles together with you. As Chris pointed out, I've moved around a bit in 20 years of preaching. I was Pacific Northwest born and raised. I was raised in Portland, Oregon, but I have lived in Texas. I lived in Abilene for 6 years. And then I lived in Phoenix, Arizona for 5 years after that. And I've been in Memphis, Tennessee, or the Memphis, Tennessee area for 3.5 years since then. So I'm basically just collecting preacher cred bingo as I go through life. West Coast raised with a little Texas credibility, lived in the desert. Now I'm in the South. I don't think there's anywhere else I need to go now, right? But I appreciate you being here today. I appreciate the invitation. I know that my wife doesn't appreciate any of you at all because this is the first week that school starts, and I abandoned my wife with 4 children in the first week of school so that I could be here with you today. I have a 12-year-old son, wonderful boy. He's always just been the apple of my eye. I have 3 girls after that, a 10-year-old daughter, an 8-year-old daughter, and we have an 18-month-old daughter as well. And they're just wonderful children, and I love them dearly, and I hope and pray, as I hope you'll pray with me, that they have a good week without me as school starts. So I want to talk about boys this week, and really by extension, men, husbands, fathers, citizens of this country. But you might be wondering, what's the application for the rest of us? Because, I'm asking you to join us again tonight. I'm asking you to come tomorrow night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. But if all these lessons are centered around boys and men and fatherhood and that sort of thing, well, what about people who are not fathers? What about people who are not husbands? What about people who are not men? Where's the application? What is the incentive to come and learn about these subjects if you're not in that particular category? Well, I have an analogy for you, and I'm not a very smart man, and so I have to have analogies. I understand things better when I have analogies, and thankfully, Josh and Lisa Stevens provided me with an analogy this morning. So I'm at their house, I'm staying in their garage apartment, and I come in to eat breakfast in their home, and I observed the way their home has been done up so beautifully. They've remodeled it, a beautiful brand new kitchen, new cabinets, all that sort of thing. And I asked, well, what precipitated all this remodeling in this home? And he said that they weren't going to remodel the whole thing. They were going to put new floors down and paint and just kind of keep it basic until they discovered behind the cabinets in the kitchen a leak in the plumbing. Apparently the dishwasher had been leaking for years and years and years. And when you have that little tiny leak, right, maybe it's just a small leak, it impacts everything around it to where you've got to rip this out and rip that out and redo that and fix that. Now, you might say plumbing has nothing to do with everything else in the house because the plumbing is not the electrical system, right? They're totally different, totally independent of each other. The plumbing has nothing to do with the drywall, right? They have nothing to do with each other. They're completely different things. The plumbing has nothing to do with the insulation in the walls. They are, again, completely different things. But when the plumbing is broken and that little leak is going for year after year after year, the plumbing very much impacts everything around it. So suddenly, the plumbing does have to do with the drywall, and the plumbing does have to do with the insulation. And unless you don't want to get electrocuted, the plumbing very much has to do with the electrical system as well. So here's my point in the analogy. Maybe you're not a boy. You're not a man. You're not a husband. You're not a father. But the problems that men are facing today are like that plumbing leak in the wall. It seeps out and it impacts everything around it. And where husbands fail, the whole family fails. Where men fail, all of society fails. Where we fail as leaders, where we fail as role models, where we fail as the Christian men that we're meant to be, everything around us is impacted. So I hope that you will join us tomorrow night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. Even though these are lessons about men, these are really lessons about all of us. So with all that being said, I want to read a quote from a book called Raising Confident Boys. Boys are in the news, says the writer, the author Elizabeth Hartley Brewer. Boys are in the news as having a hard time at the moment. They seem to be struggling, finding it harder and harder to succeed, to conform, and to find a comfortable role in life. Statistics tell us that boys experience more behavioral problems. They get involved in more crime and at a younger age. They're losing the academic edge. And they demonstrate their despair in significantly higher suicide rates than girls. Social, economic, and even educational changes seem to be undermining their essential manhood. And some see the future as promising little, but constant pressure or failure or both. Their self-esteem and motivation appear to be at rock bottom. And the writer goes on to say, remember, boys are half of our future. Given the changes taking place in society, particularly in unemployment and in the family, growing boys will naturally feel confused and uncertain about the future. For instance, what does fatherhood mean? How important are commitment and marriage? How should they manage their sometimes contradictory feelings of sadness, of anger, of tenderness, of competitiveness, and protectiveness? Now let's remember though, this is not a new problem, even though you might point at statistics and say, well, in the last 50 years, this statistic says it's changed in this way, or the last 100 years, this statistic says it's changed this way. If you look at the Bible and see it from a much more historically broad perspective, you realize the problems with men are not new problems. Take, for example, the fact that the very first murder was committed by a man. And not just by a man, but against his brother, his own brother in the book of Genesis, in the story of Cain and Abel. Take a look at the stories of Jacob and Esau, both very flawed men who allowed their flaws to dictate and dominate major portions of their life and their relationship. Take King Saul, for example, the first king of Israel. He was a head and shoulders taller than everybody else around him. He looked the part of the king. He was everything that they wanted as a king. And yet he was a man who struggled badly, woefully with self-confidence. Solomon outlines the failures of young men in his time in the book of Proverbs, where he pleads with his son throughout the book. Please listen to wisdom and instruction. Many young men in the Bible are seen as delinquents. But it doesn't have to be that way. Because for every bad example in the Bible, there's also really good examples as well. The fact that you can look at the disciples that Jesus hand-selected when he began his ministry, and while he knew full well, according to the last few verses of John chapter 6, that Judas was going to betray him, and he understood that, Jesus hand-selected men in spite of their failures, in spite of their limitations, in spite of their sometimes very apparent immaturity, and these men grew to become incredible leaders in his church. Men like Peter and Andrew, James and John, who in their younger days bickered with each other about who was the greatest in the kingdom, they learned humility and became the men that Jesus needed them to be. Paul, for example, and Barnabas, his traveling companion and very dear friend. Apollos in Acts chapter 18. Timothy, the young man who devoted his life to serve God and his son Jesus Christ and follow Paul wherever he was needed. All of these men overcame weaknesses and became confident, strong, well-adjusted Christian men. It is possible for us to be the men that we need to be. And of course, one of the greatest obstacles to helping young men deal with their spiritual shortcomings is that society gives us very, very differing views of what it even means to be a man. And so they're told one thing over here and they're told another thing over here. And I'm going to address that a little bit more fully in our second lesson here later on this morning. But let's move on and talk about some things that our boys need. What do our boys need? Paul made a statement in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 and 10 about weakness and strength. And of course, you understand in the context that Paul was talking about this thorn in the flesh, and he doesn't explain exactly what that thorn in the flesh was, and some speculate it might have been a physical disability of some kind. Some people suspect maybe that it was some shortcoming of his that he had struggled with his entire life. Others suspect that maybe it was a habitual sin that he had to keep fighting and pushing down. I'm not going to tell you what you need to think about that because Paul doesn't say what his thorn in the side was. Needless to say, Paul was able to find strength in Jesus Christ and realized a powerful truth that all of us, men and women, need to come to grips with. He makes a statement in 2 Corinthians 12, "Most gladly I will rather boast about my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties for Christ's sake." By the way, as an aside, I like that he points out for Christ's sake. Paul isn't just saying like, "Oh, you're a better person because life is hard." Well, sometimes life is just hard and it's stupid. But he says, when life is hard for Christ's sake, that's where the real treasures are found. Like, you find real nuggets of wisdom when life is hard for Christ's sake. That is where real treasure can be found. And he concludes that statement by saying, "For when I am weak, then I am strong." But is that the message that we teach our boys? Is that the message that society teaches our boys? I think more often than not, what we're teaching our boys is, when you are strong, you're strong. And when you're weak, man up. And that's the lesson that we teach our boys. Where is our source of confidence? Why are we confident? Why do we feel good about the things that we feel good about? Because you look at Paul and you go, when you're weak, then you're strong? I don't know about that. I don't think I'd feel good about my thorn in the side. Am I supposed to feel good? Am I supposed to feel good about some shortcoming? Am I supposed to feel good about something I'm not talented at? Am I supposed to feel good about the things that make me embarrassed about myself or nervous around other people? Am I supposed to feel good about my weaknesses? Where does my confidence come from? Maybe think about, if you're a man, look back on some of your own experiences as a boy. And I'm certainly not in any way trying to detract from your upbringing or your father or the way that he raised you or anything like that, but what did you want to, where was your source of impressing your dad? Where was your source of self-confidence? It was in, got to get good grades. You got to get straight A's. You got to be a valedictorian. You got to do well in sports, captain of the team, get that PR in the next race. Score the touchdown, get the home run, be the MVP, get voted most talented, most valuable, most inspirational, whatever it happens to be. As young men, we are taught from a very, very early age that our confidence comes from achievements, measurable achievements. Now, I want to be clear. Achievement is a great thing. There's nothing wrong with being the most valuable player, and there's nothing wrong with being a valedictorian. My wife, Rebecca, was valedictorian in her graduating class. But with all that being said, there's only so much spiritual value that can be found in confidence in sports and in school and in achievements, because that carries over into the rest of our lives, where if we're taught as young men that, you're valuable and confident because you're good at a sport and you got straight A's, well, then that goes into college and that carries over into a career and that carries then over into 70-hour work weeks where we justify it by saying, look, I just want to set a good example for my boy. I just want to set a good example for my son. You put the hours in so that you can pay for the Lexus and the nice house, and you can pay for the nice vacation. And I know I've worked a lot of hours this week, son, but I'm going to make it up to you with a week at Disney later on this year. Isn't that what we teach our kids? By our own examples? There's only so much real value that those things have before it becomes diminishing returns. And the lesson you're trying to teach your boy about putting the hours in and putting the work in is coming at the cost of your relationship to him and your connection to him and your connection to your spouse. All of these things are passing. They're temporary. They're superficial. What do they mean in the end? We really need to help our boys learn the value of spiritual confidence. Take Philippians 3, verse 3, for example, where the Apostle Paul says, "Put no confidence in the flesh." And I take that at face value. I mean, if he says put no confidence in the flesh, I don't think he means, well, I know I said put no confidence. I just mean put half confidence in the flesh. If he says put no confidence in the flesh, he means put no confidence in the flesh. So stop putting confidence in the flesh. 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 17, "But he who boasts, let him boast," boast, half the time in the Lord, because you gotta do your church time and everything like that, but also boast about your career achievements. No. If you're going to boast in the Lord. Boast about what Christ has done in you. Boast as Paul boasts when he points out that of all people, I'm the greatest sinner. I'm like, that to Paul, that was his greatest achievement, was like, listen, if I'm going to win at anything, if I'm going to be valedictorian at anything, I was valedictorian at being a sinner. And Jesus Christ did an amazing thing in me by taking the greatest sinner in the world, the least worthy person that you could ever imagine, and molding and shaping and sanctifying and justifying and washing and putting into service someone like me. And if Paul had any achievements, it was the achievements that Christ accomplished in him. Take a few other passages for example. Real confidence only comes from God. In Psalm 138, verse 3. Psalm 138, verse 3. "Thou didst make me bold with strength in my soul." I love the way that's put. "Thou didst make me bold with strength in my soul." Hey, that boy's got a strong arm. He's got a strong arm. He can throw a pigskin from one end of the stadium to the other. But can you say that? "Thou didst make me bold with strength in my soul." Proverbs 28, verse 1. "The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion." I mean, if you want a passage of Scripture that really emboldens the righteous, that's it right there. And I love the way he puts it. First of all, the wicked flee when no one is pursuing. The wicked flee because the wicked always have something to be afraid of. The wicked always owe somebody. They always owe somebody over here. They're always in debt with someone over there. They've hurt someone over here. They flee when no one's even chasing them, but they've always got something to be afraid of. But the righteous have nothing to be afraid of. Acts chapter 4, verse 29. "Lord, take note of their threats and grant that thy bondservants may speak thy word with all confidence." Or Ephesians 6 and verse 19. "Pray on my behalf that utterance may be given to me in the opening of my mouth to make known with boldness the mystery of the gospel." What an adventure we have to go on as Christian men. And that adventure has nothing to do with discovering new lands or achieving something in a career or climbing to the top of a mountain or getting that personal best in the marathon. Our adventure is preaching the gospel with boldness. What an amazing adventure that is. And it can actually be quite liberating to our boys to know that their confidence doesn't have to be inherently linked to skills and achievements. And that they can look at the cross of Jesus Christ and say, because of the cross of Jesus Christ, I am everything that God wants me to be. And maybe I fail at this thing over here, or I'm not good at this thing over here. But because of the cross of Jesus, I am exactly what I need to be. I know this isn't up on the screen, but I want to go and add one more reference here. Paul makes a statement in 2 Corinthians. Let me get there here first. In 2 Corinthians chapter 3, and pick up here in 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 4. 2 Corinthians 3 and verse 4. The apostle writes to the Corinthian church, "And such confidence we have through Christ toward God, not that we are adequate in ourselves to consider anything as coming from ourselves, but our adequacy is from God, who also made us adequate as servants of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life." Now, the broader context is indicating, just like Paul pointed out in the book of Romans and in other places, that you don't stand before God with confidence because you're justified by works of the law, right? You can't go to the throne of God and say, listen, I did everything I was supposed to. When it came to the law, valedictorian. When it came to attendance, perfect attendance. And I don't know what all you were doing in the pandemic, but I was at the church building recording sermons on Sunday mornings. My attendance stayed 100%, even during the pandemic. That was a joke, by the way. My adequacy does not come from these achievements. My adequacy comes from God, because God so loved the world, including me and including you, that He was willing to give His only begotten Son. Or as Paul put it in Philippians 4, verse 13, "I can do all things through Him who strengthens me." And that has nothing to do with winning basketball games, by the way. Right? You can write Philippians 4:13 on the bottom of a sneaker. That is not what Philippians 4 is talking about. Paul is not saying, I win basketball games because Christ strengthens me. He's saying, I can endure the world because Christ strengthens me. And I can be the man that I'm supposed to be because Christ strengthens me. That is incredibly liberating to our boys. Let's look at a few practical applications here. And I've got to get caught up. The first practical application of this lesson is there are 3 dangerous ingredients that we need to watch out for in our boys' lives. That carries over, of course, into adulthood, into manhood as well. And I want you to, as we talk about this, please, men, I want you to think very seriously about the lowest points in your life. You know, times in your life where you just really felt insufficient, when you felt really insecure, when you felt really alienated, really lonely, when you felt that you were at your lowest point. And notice the way it was because of these 3 dangerous ingredients, or a combination of any of these 3 dangerous ingredients that you felt that way. The first ingredient is isolation. To feel like you're alone in this world, that you have nobody that you can talk to, no one who will listen to you. To feel like you have to burden or shoulder every single burden by yourself. I will say, and I don't want to reveal too much of myself already in this first lesson, because I tend to be kind of raw emotionally. You know, it's like if you open up the bag, it's hard to let Ryan back in, okay, emotionally. But I will say, the last few years, I've noticed in myself a sense of isolation where I feel like I have to handle everything by myself. And I've got to fall on a sword, or I got to, whatever trope you want to use, whatever analogy fits your own life best. But I have felt like for a few years now that I've had to just shoulder everything. And that's a very dangerous thing to put on yourself, because God did not intend for us to come to this world and be alone in our struggles. The second ingredient is insecurity, feeling like I can't do it. No matter how hard I try, no matter how good I am at something, I will always come up short. A third ingredient is insignificance. And I've also felt this at times. Preachers, we put on a good show, right? We wear a tie, except for Chris, who does not have a tie on today. It's like, if you were a visitor here, you probably wouldn't even know who the regular preacher was. But preachers we put on the tie, we put on the show, we get up here and we say things so confidently. We've rehearsed it, we've practiced it all week, and we look the part. We've got the adorable little family with the stair-step children and everything like that. And then deep down inside, I think a lot of preachers feel like what's been the point of it all? What's the point? I might as well quit. And I'm not blaming you, the church, at all. But there are times where preachers feel like I get up and I preach something on Sunday and I give it my all and I think I say what needs to be said and I've given passion to it and I put study into it. But there's a part of me that just feels like on Monday morning, everybody's just going to get up and their life is going to go on normal, and it's as if I didn't even preach anything. And there's a sense of insignificance. What about in your job? Maybe you look at your job and go, yeah, I'm stamping out metal parts all week long. Yeah, I'm handling finances for some rich guy who's got a yacht in the Azores. And you look at your life and you go, what's the point of it? What is the point of this life that I'm living? What have I achieved? What have I accomplished? I might as well not even be here. That's the impact that I've had on the world around me. My friends, my brothers, my sisters, these three ingredients play right into Satan's hand. They, whether one by itself or three in combination, they make up a deadly mixture, a cocktail that poisons our lives and keeps us from being what we need to be. For the Christian, it is so easy to see who is behind these conditions, and it is Satan. It was always Satan. Jesus called him the father of lies, and everything he says is a lie, and he's been a murderer from the beginning, from the very beginning. As soon as Satan showed up in Genesis chapter 3, his goal, look at those three dangerous ingredients. His goal was to isolate. Listen, I see Adam and Eve, they're together, they're naked and unashamed, they're the model marriage, they've got God connecting them. You know what I need to get them separated. I need to drive a wedge between Adam and Eve, and if I can do that, I can drive a wedge between God and Adam. Wouldn't that be great? Isolation, insecurity. You mean God told you that if you eat of the fruit, you'll die? That seems a little harsh, don't you think? Because, Eve, I heard, it's just me, I heard that if you eat the fruit, you'll become smart like God. Wouldn't you want to be smart like God? Or are you okay just being the helper? Insignificance, right? Genesis 3 plays into the insignificance of it all, doesn't it? Like, you just want to be Adam and Eve? Like, you mean God put you in the garden to go work a little plot of land, and didn't you ever want more for yourself than that? Guys, didn't you ever want more for yourself than that? God's keeping something from you. He's keeping you down. It's played into Satan's hand the whole time. Remember something. It is Satan's ultimate goal to isolate and alienate us from God. Isaiah chapter 59. What does sin do? Causes a gulf between you and your God. It worked with Judas. These three dangerous ingredients in some combination worked with Judas. It worked with King Saul. It almost worked with Elijah. Remember in 1 Kings chapter 19? Elijah crawled into a cave and said, I'm done. I'm out. I quit. God, I can't do this anymore. I can't be the only one. All the other prophets are dead, and I'm here speaking the truth, and now they want to come after me and kill me too. God, I'm done. I can't do this by myself. It nearly worked with Elijah. It nearly worked with Jeremiah as well. Multiple points in the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah says things to the effect of, God, I wish I had never been born. I mean, it would have been a better thing if I'd been a stillborn. God, I'm serious. If I had never been born, if my parents had never heard the words, a son has been born to you, I think I would have been better off if I'd just been dead. Jeremiah actually said that. That played right into Satan's hands. We need to remind our boys that they are not alone in this world, that they are significant to a lot of people, including God, and that they are extremely, extremely valuable to God. Like I said from John 3, verse 16, God so loved the world. Who's included in that? You are. God so loved the world, and you are included in that. To God, you are worth the blood of His only begotten Son. And that is an amazing, amazing sense of significance and partnership and love and value that you derive from God. Another practical application. Our boys, and if we're playing sermon bingo here, we got a little play on words, so you can check that one off. Our boys need our presence, not our presents. See, I put the hard T in there so you'd know the difference. Whether we're parents or coaches or counselors of some kind, our boys and our girls, for that matter, need our support and our companionship. After all, as the same author, Hartley Brewer, said in that book, presents are no substitute for our presence. Our kids desperately want relationships with significant role models in their lives, which is why, and we'll save this for tonight is it 5 p.m. or 6 p.m.? 5, okay, 5. At 5 p.m., I saved for 5 p.m. the hardest, most uncomfortable lesson of them all. So please come back at 5. But I think this is part of the reason why predators find it so easy to find their way into people's lives, because we really want companionship. Our boys, our girls really want companionship. And if we're not providing that companionship, well, there's plenty of other people that will gladly raise their hand and say, well, I'll provide that companionship, but it's going to be on my terms. In many ways, this is why churches decline. In many ways, this is why families fall apart. And this is why kids do dangerous and harmful things to each other and to teachers and to coaches. And this is why kids commit suicide. Because we replace our presence in their lives with presents. Thinking, I know, son, I know. I haven't spent a lot of time with you. I know I missed the big game last week. I know it was important to you. I get that. But if we just kind of get through the next quarter, I just need to get through the next quarter, things will slow down and maybe we'll go on that fishing trip you've been wanting all this time. I know that that's kind of a stereotypical example that I'm just pulling from thin air. I understand that. But maybe put yourself in the shoes, kind of tailor that to your own situation, to your own circumstances, and you see, we think that a week at Disney is going to make up for the rest of the year of neglect. We think that if we just kind of pile the stuff on, or we say, I'm doing this so that I can afford to send you to the best college when you leave. I'm working all these hours so that I can send you to that college that you want to. All along, I think what they wanted was just for us to listen, have conversations, to give advice. And a little bit of that goes a long way. Another point to make also, we need to encourage tender qualities in our boys. As I already alluded to, most boys believe that they have to put on a show of toughness, and any sign of sensitivity or anything like that equates to weakness to our boys. And yet, there is a lot of exhortation in the Bible about men displaying very tender qualities. You take a look at Jesus Christ, who wept bitterly and openly and didn't believe he had to hide it, that he felt things very deeply. Jesus had a very tender relationship with many of his disciples. Jesus had a very tender relationship with his mother. Some of the qualifications for elders include words like gentleness, hospitality, faithfulness. We need to show our young men by our own examples that one is being most manly, not least manly, when he tenderly loves his wife and cherishes her, like Ephesians 5 verse 29 says, or 1 Peter 3 and verse 7. That he cares for his children, because the model example of fatherhood is from Psalm 103, where the father has compassion on us the way a father has compassion on his own children. That he can express grief at a time of loss and weep at a funeral, or weep for joy at a wedding. That he puts others' feelings ahead of his own, and that empathy and sympathy are indeed very manly qualities. We need to teach our boys, as the writer of Proverbs does in Proverbs chapter 1, that they need to follow the right crowd. I know that we're just about out of time here. These last couple points, I'll have to go pretty quickly here. But in Proverbs chapter 1, and I'll summarize it just for the sake of time. In Proverbs chapter 1, the writer, Solomon, makes this interesting point to his son about the kind of crowd that he surrounds himself with. He tells him in verses 8 through 19 to watch out for the sinners that entice you, to don't follow that crowd when they say, hey, come along with us. We're going to do all kinds of things for you. You're going to find your lot with us. You're going to have your share in the purse with us when we go and commit sin. He says, no, you've got to keep away from that kind of crowd. We need to provide a safe alternative to that. And the last point that I want to make is to tell him his story. Young men have a much easier time committing to something if they know that there's a legacy at stake. Do your sons know what the legacy is? Do your daughters know what the legacy is? Do they know that even if your family's not been a Christian family, right? And I say obnoxious finger quotes there. If your family's not been a Christian family for generation after generation after generation, do they know, though, that being a Christian makes them part of a family that stretches back 2,000 years to the establishment of the church on the day of Pentecost in Acts chapter 2. That when you become a Christian, you're part of something bigger than yourself. And I believe that when we tell our children that they're part of something bigger, it emboldens them, it strengthens them, it motivates them to know, I'm part of a legacy here. Or as the writer pointed out in that book I mentioned, get out family photos from time to time. Talk about the people and the events that are shown in them. Let your boys see that they're part of something bigger and part of something special, that they fit into a story of redemption, and that their talents and their abilities are needed in that story in God's kingdom. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verses 5 and 6 is an illustration of this very point, where Paul tells Timothy, I am mindful of the sincere faith within you, which first dwelt in your grandmother, Lois, and in your mother, Eunice, and I am sure that it is in you as well. By appealing to that sense of legacy, he's motivating Timothy to kindle afresh the gift of God which is in you. To remember your grandmother and your mother. You're all part of something bigger than yourselves. We've got to teach our kids that as well. I thank you so much for your attention this morning. We'll be dismissed at this time. We'll get back together for worship here in a few minutes.